Hello everyone, thank you for watching Wikipedia World videos. We learn about different SAP user types in this video, okay? So in the last 3 videos when we have started about SAP security, especially in the last video, okay, so we have learned about SU01, user administration. So in SU01, in the logon data tab, we have an option where we have to provide like what type of user ID it is, okay? So we have basically 5 different types of user IDs in SAP, okay? So in SU01, when you create a user, you can specify one of these 5 types of users. The first one is the dialog user. So this gives, when you select as a dialog user, it has the following characteristics. It will provide individual system access, personalized access. It is possible to log on using SAP GUI. Then the system checks whether the password has expired or initial, okay? So individual system access means when a user is given a user ID which is of type dialog, so you will be able to directly log on to SAP GUI, okay? So this is for individual system access. When we have n number of users and they want to access the system, you should choose their user type as dialog, okay? And this dialog user has the ability to log on to SAP GUI. Then the third thing is the password of this user is checked. If it's initial means, like if it's the first time the user is giving the password, then it will prompt to change his password, okay? Or it will check if the password has expired also. Then the user can change his or her password himself or herself, okay? So after entering the user ID and the password, the user has the option to change the password also. Then the system checks multiple dialog logons and logs these if necessary, okay? So the user, say like you have logged on from this terminal, so you can log on from one more terminal, okay? So you can have multiple dialog logins. And the purpose of this dialog user type is, it's for individual human users, including internet users, okay? We have gone through this concept of internet users in the last videos, okay? See, like there is some other application using SAP. So when the user uses that application, he will be given an option to create his user ID using SU01, or the security administrator has to create his user ID in SAP for a reference, okay? So they don't actually do anything in SAP, but they have an option to create their own user ID in SAP, or the administrator will create, because it is required for reference purpose, okay? So when we say about a dialog user type, okay, these are the characteristics, and the purposes of creating dialog users are nothing but it's for individual human users. So whenever a person wants to use an SAP system using GUI, so he has to get a user ID of type dialog, okay? So that is the main purpose. So in SAP system, generally we have users doing some work, okay? So apart from this, we'll have other type of users also, but mostly we have users who log on to the SAP GUI. So we have more dialog users in the system, okay? And it's nothing but it's a dialog work process which picks up, okay? So this task, okay, and whatever the user processing it does, that is done through dialog work process. So this is the first and the important one in SAP user type is a dialog user. The next one is a system user. System related and internal system process. So the system user ID, why it is required? This is related for system, internal system processing. It is not possible to log on using SAP GUI. So when a user type is of system, that user can't log on using SAP GUI. The password change requirement does not apply to the passwords, that is, they cannot be initial or expired. So the system passwords, okay, like for a dialog user ID, when the password is given, the system checks if it's initial or expired. So those restrictions are not there for the system user ID. Only a user administrator can change the password, okay? And multiple logons are permissible, okay? So here for a dialog user ID, okay, unless you have to set some parameters where multiple and maximum number of dialog logins are permitted, for system type users there is no such restriction. And what is the purpose? Background processing and communication within a system, that is internal RFC calls, and between multiple systems, external RFC calls. And it's, for example, it's like for RFC users, for ALE, workflow, TMS, central user administration, so on. Okay, so when you say system only, and the description says like it's used for system and internal processing. Okay, so like for RFC processing, you have RFCs are created in SM59. So in that you have to provide a user ID used for communication between these two RFCs. RFCs can be established internally or they can be established between one system to another. So for such RFC processing, we create system user IDs. Okay, system user types. Okay, and the other one is like for workflows, TMS, that is transport management system, and CUA. So all these, okay, ALE, workflow, TMS, CUA, all of these, they require RFCs. Okay, so in those RFCs you will give a user which is of type system. Okay, so this is the first one is dialog, the next one is system. Now the next one is a communication user. Okay, so this is used for individual system access. Okay, but this user cannot log in using SAP GUI. Now, although the system checks whether the password has expired or initial, the implementation of the requirement to change the password, which exists in the principle, depends on the logon method. It's an interactive or a non-interactive. And the user can change the password himself or herself, okay, like a dialog one, but that is not possible in system user ID. Okay, and the purpose of this is like external RFC calls of individual human users. Now this communication, don't get confused with this system user ID. Okay, system user ID is used for this user ID internal, you give it in the RFCs. Okay, so that's used for internal as well as external RFC processing and all other workflow, TMS, UA, which use the concept of RFCs. Now, this communication user ID is when you give a user type as communication, he cannot log in with SAP GUI. Okay, but however, you can give this in RFC also. Okay, and here the password, it depends like whether the logon method is interactive or non-interactive. Okay, so depending upon that, the password of this user can be changed. Okay, so the user can change the password himself or herself. Okay, and this is used for external RFC calls of individual human users. Okay, so here also the system checks if the password is initial or expired, which don't apply to the system user IDs. It's similar to dialog type, but it depends like on the logon method. Okay, so depending upon the logon method, if it's interactive, then the password restrictions are checked whether it's initial or expired. If it's non-interactive, then the password restrictions are not checked. Here the password can be changed by the user himself. Okay, and this is used for external RFC calls of individual human users. Okay, and here also you cannot log in directly to a SAP GUI. Now, a service user ID. This is a shared system access for a larger anonymous group of users. Assign only very restricted authorizations of this user type. Okay. Now, service users means service user, like so many users, they require only a single user ID to log on to the system for doing some work. Say like there is a workflow team. Okay, so all of them generally share a common workflow user ID. Okay, even though they have their individual user IDs, they use a common user ID for doing certain tasks like the test team, the testing team, etc. So in that case, we create a user of type service and we give it to them. So here the GUI logon is possible. So during a logon, here also this password restrictions, whether it's initial or expired, it is checked. Okay, so however here only the administrator can change the password, the user cannot change. Okay, and here multiple logons are permitted. Okay, and anonymous system access, such as like for public web services. Okay, so the service user is used by n number of users if they want to share a common user ID. Okay, and they can log on using SAP GUI. The initial password restrictions are not checked here, whether the password are expired or it's initial. But here, unlike a user can change his password, this group of users, because the user ID is shared by a set of users, they can't change the password. Say like if one user among the 5 changes the password of this service user, then the others will, if they are not communicated, they'll not be able to log in. Okay, and multiple times of login with the wrong password locks the user ID. That's why here only the administrator is permitted to change the password, and the purpose of this service user ID is for multiple logons. Okay, and the other thing is it's used for anonymous system access. Okay, now the last one is the reference user. Okay, so this is not possible to log on to the system. Okay, so this user type is used for general non-person related users that allow the assignment of additional identical authorizations, such as for internet users created with transaction as user 1. So this reference user is not, unlike all the other users, this is not used to log on to the system. Okay, so this is used for, say like if you want to, it as the name states, okay, you want to copy something from a user ID. Okay, then this reference user is used. Okay, now if you assign a reference user to a user, only the reference user's authorizations are inherited. You cannot copy any other role attributes or user attributes such as role menu. So if you assign a reference user to a particular user, okay, then only for to get the authorizations. Okay, so the reference user authorizations are inherited. The other things like the user attributes or role attributes are not copied. And you can also only impart authorizations for one step. This means you cannot assign a reference user to a reference user in order to accumulate the authorizations of both reference users. Okay, so you can assign a reference user to non-reference user. You can't assign one reference user to another and that reference user to some normal Dialog user ID or whatever it is. Okay, so for all that, this reference user can be taken as a reference only for non-reference user IDs. That is, say like this reference, if some user ID is taken as a reference and it's of type a reference, this is used to assign, we have to assign it to a non-reference user type, not to a reference user ID. Okay, now to assign a reference user to a Dialog user, specify it while maintaining the Dialog user on the role tab page. In general, the application controls the assignment of reference users. This assignment is valid for all systems in CUA. If the assigned reference user does not exist in CUA child system, the assignment is ignored. Okay, so if you want to assign this reference user ID to a Dialog user, then you have to specify it on the maintaining the Dialog user on the roles tab page. Okay, so in this reference user ID in the roles tab page, that Dialog user ID has to be specified. Okay, now you should also be very cautious while creating reference users. SAP recommend that you place all reference users in one particular secure user group to protect them from changes to assigned authorizations and deletions. So SAP says like generally these reference user IDs are hardly used, they are not much used. Okay, because say like the reference user ID has so many authorizations. Okay, and if you assign it to a non-reference user ID, then this non-reference user ID will get all the authorizations of that reference user ID. Right, so now if you make any changes to this reference user, then the other non-reference user IDs which are assigned to this reference user ID also get affected. Okay, so SAP says like you put all these reference users in one user group to protect them from changes to assigned authorizations and deletions. So if there are any authorization changes now and then, say like there are some roles in the reference user ID. Okay, so somebody is making some role maintenance, they are adding and deleting some profiles in the roles, then this reference user ID will be affected, and all the other non-reference user IDs which are assigned to this reference user ID are also affected. So many authorizations will be disturbed. Okay, so SAP strictly says like you put all these reference user IDs, okay, in one user group. So if you make any changes to authorizations, okay, then this user group can be explicitly excluded from that. Okay, so this concept of reference user ID, you'll find it in very rare cases. Okay, I don't say like it's not used, but it's used, but not as that often. Okay, so just briefing up what we have learned in this video is different SAP user types. We have started with the Dialog user ID. Okay, so it's used for individual human users. They log on to the system using SAP GUI. Here the system password restrictions like expired initial are strictly checked. Okay, user can change his or her password, and multiple Dialog logins are checked. Okay, say generally, there is a parameter for this multi-Dialog logons. Okay, so if you what all Dialog user IDs which are permitted to have this multiple Dialog logins can be given there. So all other users are excluded from this multiple Dialog logins. Say like I'm logging on from here. Okay, say like somebody has hacked your user ID and password, and they are trying to log on from other terminal. Okay, so immediately your session will be terminated here, or he will get a prompt that this user ID is already logged on, you want to terminate it or whatever it is. So then at least you'll come to know, like you'll get a message that your user ID is logged on from a different terminal and you are being logged off here. Then you'll come to know like, oh, somebody else is also using my user ID. That's why when individual humans are using this, multi-Dialog login is generally restricted. And if you want to gain access to this multiple Dialog logons for certain user IDs which are required, say like in your team you're sharing one user ID. Okay, so there is a parameter, and you can give those user IDs in that parameter, so that the system will allow multiple Dialog logons only for those set of users. Multi-Dialog login, there is one parameter. Okay, so this is about Dialog users, and generally all users, human users, come under this group. The next one is the system. So this is used for generally the system related internal processing, generally like the internal and the external RFCs. So here it's not possible to log on to SAP GUI directly with this ID and the password. Okay, you have a GUI in your laptop, you can't open that GUI and put the system user ID and the password, it will not allow. Okay, and here this password restrictions do not apply, that is initial or expired. Only the administrator can change this password, and here multiple logons are always permitted. Okay, so this is generally used for RFC users which are used in ALE, workflow, TMS, central user administration, etc. Now, the third one is the communication user ID. Okay, so here also this is individual system access is permitted, but it is not possible to log on using SAP GUI. So here this communication user also, you can't open SAP GUI and then give this communication user ID and a password. System will not allow. Okay, so here generally the password restrictions do not apply, but it depends on which logon method, whether it's an interactive or a non-interactive logon method. And here the user can change his or her password, and this is used for external RFC calls. Okay, so when I mean this external RFC calls, okay, say like you have in SM59 you have the RFCs, right? Okay, so when you are establishing an RFC connection between two systems ABC and XYZ, so in this ABC you will have an RFC of XYZ. Okay, so in that RFC XYZ you will give this communication user ID. So from there you have an option like logon option. So in that case you can give this communication user ID. You understood? So if a user is going to SM59 and system ABC and trying to do a remote logon to XYZ from this ABC, okay, so a user is doing that action. This is an interactive logon. So in that case he can change his password, and here this password things like whether it has expired or initial are checked. Okay, but if the system implicitly does uses this communication user ID for a login from system ABC to XYZ, then these password restrictions are not checked. Okay, so you have in SM59 you have an option of remote logon to the target system. Okay, so there if a human user is going to SM59 and system ABC, is going to XYZ RFC and doing a remote logon. So that particular user ID and the password which are given in that RFC, okay, when that is an interactive method. Okay, so here the user, when he logs on to the target system, he can change the password, or the other thing is here the password restrictions are also applicable. However, when the system tries to make a connection from ABC to XYZ in a report or something implicitly during the system processing, the password restrictions do not apply. Understood? So in most of the RFCs we give communication user IDs. Generally we can specify a dialog user ID also in some cases, but generally we give a system user ID or a communication user ID. Okay, now the fourth type is a service user ID. Service user ID means SAP GL logon is possible. Okay, so this user ID is shared across anonymous group of users. Here the password restrictions do not apply. User cannot change the password, only administrator can change the password, and multiple logons are permitted for this user ID by default. Okay, and the last one is the reference user ID. So this is not used to log on to the system. It's nothing but it's just created in the system, and all the other non-reference user IDs can be assigned to this reference user ID so that they inherit the authorizations from this reference user ID. And generally this reference user ID is used in exceptionally rare cases. Okay, so yes, and SAP says like put all the reference user IDs in one user group. Okay, because you should be very cautious while creating and using these reference user IDs. Okay, so we have discussed about the 5 different types of user types which are used in SU01 in this video. So keep on watching the other videos as well. Thank you.